The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the quiet kitchen as Thomas leaned against the counter, his hands wrapped around his favorite ceramic mug. The digital clock above the stove blinked 6:43 a.m. The sun was just starting to filter through the blinds, casting thin, golden beams over the marble countertops. Madeline stood at the sink, her back to him, hair still damp from the shower. She was wearing the gray cardigan he had given her last Christmas, the one she used to call her comfort sweater. These days, it just hung on her like an afterthought. "You working late again tonight?" Thomas asked, keeping his tone casual. Madeline didn't turn around. "Yeah, end of quarter reports. It's been insane." Her voice was clipped, rehearsed, like she'd answered that question too many times in her head already. Thomas nodded and took a sip of coffee, letting the heat settle his nerves. It wasn't the first time she'd said that this month, or the second, or the fifth. "Need me to pick up the kids from practice?" Madeline rinsed a bowl and finally glanced at him over her shoulder. "That'd be great. Saves me from racing across town." He smiled gently, but it fell off, like smiling into a mirror that didn't reflect back. "No problem." The air between them hung still for a moment, heavy with the weight of unspoken things. 23 years of marriage taught Thomas to read Madeline without her saying a word. And lately, everything about her was different. Her phone clutched tighter, screen always turned downward, a new perfume he hadn't bought her, and the subtle yet unmistakable way her eyes wandered past him when he spoke. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. Madeline dried her hands and leaned against the kitchen island, sipping from her water bottle. "Hey," she began, her tone changing, lighter, almost forced cheerful. "Can you meet me tomorrow night? At Le Meritage?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Le Meritage? The fancy French place." She nodded. "Yeah, 7:30. I have something planned. A surprise. I want it to be special." A flicker of hope sparked inside him. Maybe she'd noticed how distant things had gotten too. Maybe she wanted to fix it, rekindle things. The place was expensive, but they'd gone there for their 10th anniversary. That night, she'd worn a red dress and laughed with her wine glass tilted in one hand, the candlelight making her eyes glow. He hadn't seen her laugh like that in months. "Sounds fancy," Thomas said with a half-smile. "Do I need to wear a tie?" Madeline chuckled lightly, and for a second, the sound stirred something familiar. "Maybe just don't show up in your ratty flannel." "Hey, that flannel's a classic. Vintage even." She smirked and shook her head, then checked her phone as it buzzed in her pocket. Her expression shifted quickly. She pressed a button and slid it away. Thomas watched her carefully. "Everything okay?" "Work." She didn't elaborate. He wanted to ask more. "Who was texting you before 7 a.m.? Why do you always look guilty when you put your phone away?" But instead, he took another sip of coffee and turned toward the fridge. There was a time to push and a time to wait. "I'll make the reservation under your name," Madeline added, grabbing her purse and keys. "You like the surprise?" "I'm sure I will," he replied, forcing warmth into his voice. She paused near the door. "Thanks for grabbing the kids." "Always." And just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving behind only the ticking of the wall clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. Later that afternoon, Thomas sat in his home office, absently scrolling through spreadsheets, but his mind was far from work. He stared at a wedding photo on the bookshelf. Madeline in her simple white gown, smiling up at him like he was her entire world. 23 years had gone by fast. The kids, the mortgage, the startup business he built from scratch. Through sickness, debt, layoffs, they'd stuck together. At least, that's what he believed. But lately, the distance had grown undeniable. It wasn't just emotional anymore, it was physical. She flinched at touch. Her hugs had become quick pats on the back. She started going to the gym at odd hours. Started taking solo trips for business conferences. And there were whispers, little things from friends at parties. Side glances, shrugs when he asked questions. He tried to dismiss the doubt. Every marriage had seasons. But deep down, something gnawed at him. He picked up his phone and texted his friend Derek. "Thomas, hey man, you free for golf this weekend?" No reply, not even Reed. They used to golf twice a month, but Derek had gone quiet lately. Said he'd been tied up with work. Same as Madeline. He shook his head. Maybe he was just being paranoid. Maybe tomorrow really would be a surprise in the good kind of way. An anniversary redo. A gesture of reconciliation. He didn't want to lose her. He didn't want to break his family. He didn't want to admit that maybe she already had. The next day arrived with little fanfare. Thomas spent the day buried in work, trying to stay distracted. His nerves jittered, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Around 5, he headed upstairs to shower, carefully choosing a navy blazer Madeline had once complimented in a crisp white button-down shirt. No tie, but clean-shaven, aftershave just right. He checked his reflection in the mirror. Aging around the edges, sure, but not bad. Still a man trying to look good for his wife. He arrived at Le Meritage 5 minutes early. The maitre d' greeted him with a polished smile. The valet opened Thomas's car door with the kind of perfunctory politeness reserved for high-end clientele. Thomas stepped out, adjusting the collar of his blazer, trying to suppress the restless flutter in his stomach. He glanced at his reflection in the restaurant's glass window, neatly pressed shirt, dark slacks, polished shoes. He looked sharp, presentable, hopeful. He breathed out slowly, smoothing his jacket. "You've got this. It's just dinner. Maybe something good. Maybe she wants to fix things." The maitre d' greeted him again, this time with a flourish. "Welcome back, sir." "Madeline Whitmore," Thomas said, his voice calm but tight in his throat. "Yes, they're already seated." "They?" Thomas's brow twitched. He followed the maitre d' through the hushed elegance of Le Meritage, where chandeliers threw golden webs of light over white tablecloths and soft jazz hummed through the air. As they rounded a corner, his heart dropped. Madeline was sitting at a window-side table, glowing under the amber light. Her black dress hugged her curves immaculately, and a gold necklace shimmered at her collarbone. Her lipstick was crimson, like blood against her porcelain skin. She looked beautiful, radiant even, but it wasn't her beauty that made his footsteps falter. It was Derek, his best friend, his best man. Derek sat next to Madeline, one arm draped lazily across the back of her chair, wine glass tilted toward his lips, his smirk unmistakable. "Ah, there he is." Madeline's voice rang out smoothly, but it carried no warmth, only sharp amusement. Thomas stopped at the edge of the table, his face trying to arrange itself into something neutral. "Derek," he said slowly, looking between them. "Have a seat, Thomas," Madeline said sweetly. She gestured to the empty chair across from them. "We've been waiting." Still confused, he sat down slowly. Madeline didn't lean in for a kiss, nor did she offer a greeting. Derek raised his glass with a sarcastic nod. "You look nice," Madeline said flatly, her eyes scanning him like a judge before sentencing. "I wasn't sure you'd make the effort." Thomas's confusion sharpened into discomfort. "What's going on?" Madeline's smile widened, tight, cruel, rehearsed. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a manila envelope. With a casual flick of her fingers, she slid it across the table. The envelope bumped into Thomas's plate. He picked it up slowly and opened it. Divorce papers. His breath caught. Madeline folded her hands beneath her chin, clearly savoring the moment. "Surprise," she whispered, voice dripping honey and poison. Thomas stared at the papers in disbelief. He blinked. Once. Twice. His heart was suddenly racing in his chest. "This has to be a joke," he muttered, flipping through the first few pages. Her signature was already there. Initialed. Final. All assets listed as transferred to her private account. Joint custody of the kids suggested on paper, but the note at the bottom read, "He can keep them. I moved the money out 2 weeks ago," Madeline said, as if discussing a grocery list. "Every cent from our joint account is now where it belongs with me." "You what?" Derek chuckled under his breath, taking a sip of wine. Thomas looked up, eyes locked on her. "Madeline, we built that account together." That's gone," she interrupted, cutting him off like she was snipping thread with scissors. "And so are we. I'm done with this pathetic, stagnant life. I deserve better. I deserve happiness." Thomas's mouth opened, but words didn't come. His mind was still trying to keep up with the surreal theater unfolding before him. Madeline tilted her head. "You really didn't see this coming?" "Honestly, Thomas, you're blind, clueless, boring. You've been going through the motions for years. You don't touch me. You don't excite me. You're just there, like wallpaper. Derek leaned forward, clearly enjoying the show. No offense, buddy, but she needed a real man. Thomas's eyes snapped to Derek. You son of a... Madeline laughed then, a hard, cruel sound that echoed too loud in the quiet restaurant. Heads began to turn. Waiters glanced over discreetly. Don't make a scene, Madeline said smugly. Not here. It would be embarrassing for you. Thomas's jaw clenched. You were sleeping with him. How long? Madeline raised an eyebrow. Long enough to know what I've been missing. Derek grinned. It started at that lake house weekend, remember? While you were off picking up the kids. We figured, why waste time pretending? Thomas felt his stomach twist, ball rising in his throat. The papers trembled in his hands. Madeline leaned back, eyes glittering. He listens to me. He doesn't fall asleep during sex. He actually wants me. You haven't looked at me like that in years. That's not true, Thomas said through clenched teeth. She waved a dismissive hand. It doesn't matter. It's too late. I'm leaving you. Starting fresh. Derek and I have a villa in Santorini waiting. Our flight's tomorrow. Romantic honeymoon, just the two of us. No more dragging deadweight. And the kids? Thomas asked, voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged. You can keep them. They're closer to you anyway. I want my freedom. Thomas stared at her, completely frozen. The woman across from him wasn't the wife he knew. She wasn't even a stranger. She was a ghost wearing Madeline's face. Derek stood up and threw a few bills on the table. Drinks are on me, he said with a wink. Consider it a farewell gift. Madeline stood too, adjusting the strap of her purse, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Don't look so shocked, she said sweetly. You'll survive. Eventually, they turned to leave. Hand in hand, Thomas sat motionless as they walked past the maitre d', past the jazz trio, out into the night. The silence they left behind roared in his ears. He looked down at the divorce papers again. Her signature on every page. Her decision carved in legal ink. The cold, efficient dismantling of 23 years of shared life, executed without warning, without remorse. He sat there for several long minutes, unable to move. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. His mouth dry, his chest aching. A waiter hesitated nearby, unsure if he should approach. Thomas didn't notice, didn't hear, didn't care. The soft jazz played on. The front door clicked open with a hollow echo. Thomas stepped into the dark foyer, closing the door behind him with a trembling hand. He stood there for a moment, motionless, the quiet of the house pressing in on him like a suffocating blanket. His fingers were still curled around the manila envelope that now felt radioactive. Divorce papers. Cold. Final. Mocking. He didn't bother turning on the lights. The moonlight pouring through the living room windows was enough to guide him through a home that now felt foreign. He slipped off his shoes like muscle memory, left his jacket on the hallway chair, and walked into the living room with the slow, dazed steps of a man waking from a nightmare. Only he hadn't woken up. The silence was deafening. The soft hum of the refrigerator. The creak of the floorboard beneath his heel. His own breathing, shallow, uneven. Then his eyes fell on the photos. One by one, like taunts lying along the shelves. Madeline holding baby James, laughing with her eyes closed, hair windblown on that beach trip to Outer Banks. Madeline in her wedding dress, biting her lips shyly as Thomas lifted her veil in front of a cheering crowd of friends and family. Madeline in a Santa hat, arms wrapped around Thomas and their daughter, Mia, all of them covered in flour from a gingerbread baking disaster. He couldn't look away. Every frame was a stab, every smile a betrayal retroactively soured. His legs gave out, and he slumped into the leather couch. He stared at their family portrait above the fireplace, last Christmas. Matching pajamas. Madeline had insisted. Just one cheesy tradition, she'd said. Please for me. His jaw clenched. His vision blurred. The bile returned to his throat. Suddenly, as if pulled by invisible threads, he stood and stumbled into the kitchen. He yanked open the cabinet, grabbing the nearest glass and slamming it down on the counter harder than necessary. He turned on the sink, filling the glass slowly. The water poured over the rim. His hand shook. His breath grew ragged. Then he slammed the glass into the sink. It exploded, shards everywhere. The sound was violent, sharp, final. And then came the tears. He gasped like a man drowning, collapsing against the counter as sobs tore through his chest. He slid to the floor, fists clenched, body shaking. 23 years unraveled inside him all at once. Every memory, every word, every night spent thinking they were building something. He cried until there was nothing left but silence and the sound of water still running. He turned it off and sat in the dark. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Eventually, he pulled himself up, wiped his eyes on his sleeve, and walked toward the stairs like a ghost. The door to Mia's room was cracked. Inside, her fairy lights glowed gently around the ceiling. She was curled in bed, headphones on, eyes closed, peaceful. James' door was closed tight. He'd always been a heavy sleeper. His gaming chair was still lit up from beneath the door, but there was no sound. They don't know yet. He exhaled shakily. In his bedroom, no, the bedroom, he sat at the edge of the bed and opened his phone. The wallpaper was still a picture of Madeline and the kids at the lake. She was laughing, sunglasses pushed up at her hair, holding a watermelon slice like a trophy. He stared at it until his thumb finally moved to unlock the screen. And then he scrolled, photo after photo. Vacation albums, anniversary dinners, messages from her. Miss you already, pleading face, red heart. Hurry home. I save you the last slice. Don't forget our reservation tonight, kiss mark. He scrolled until the tears came again. But this time he didn't cry. He just let them roll down in silence. At 3:12 a.m., he found himself rereading a text from just 6 weeks ago. Madeline, I know I've been distant. It's just work stress. We'll be okay. I love you. Work stress. I love you. He laughed. Just once. Sharp. Empty. Then he opened the gallery again, his thumb trembling over the most recent photos. The signs were there. Madeline at the spa alone, but Derek had tagged himself at the same resort that same day. A concert she swore she went to with girlfriends, yet no photos with them, only a blurry image of a man's silhouette beside her. The earrings she wore last month? The ones Thomas had never seen before? A birthday gift from someone, she said. She never wore what he got her that year. The lie had been growing like a tumor, and he'd been blind. By 4 a.m., he was still sitting up in bed, his phone screen casting a dim blue glow in the room. Sleep was an afterthought, something meant for other people. He went back to the living room, to the bookshelf where Madeline kept the family albums. He pulled down one from their honeymoon and sat cross-legged on the floor. Niagara Falls. 2002. They danced in the rain on that bridge, Madeline screaming with laughter as they ran to the car soaking wet. His finger brushed over her face in the photo. Where did that Madeline go? Or had she always been this version, hidden beneath layers of affection and convenience? The questions didn't matter. The answers wouldn't change anything. As the sky began to lighten, Thomas got up slowly and went to the kitchen again. The glass shards still sparkled in the sink like ice. He cleaned them quietly, mechanically, every motion stiff but focused. By the time the coffee machine sputtered to life, he felt like a hollow man in a stranger's body. He poured a cup and sat at the table where they used to have breakfast together. He took one sip. Bitter. Perfect. And then, in the soft, tired voice of a man whose heart had been cracked in two, Thomas whispered to no one. She wants a new life. He set the mug down. I'll show her a new one. The days that followed were filled with quiet fury. Thomas didn't rage. He didn't scream, didn't throw things or storm through the house in some melodramatic fit. Instead, he became still. Too still. The kind of stillness that hides a storm brewing beneath the surface. The smile he wore in front of the kids was rehearsed but convincing. He got them to school, handled dinners, and even managed polite small talk about homework and Mia's upcoming piano recital. But once the house was asleep, Thomas came alive. He was no longer a husband or father in those late-night hours. He was a ghost, a machine, a man on a mission. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, he sat in the glow of his computer screen, eyes bloodshot, scrolling through phone records he'd quietly requested from their mobile provider. Madeline's call logs painted a picture clearer than any photograph. Dozens of late-night calls to Derek's number, some lasting hours. regular texts during the workday, even when she claimed to be swamped with meetings. One number kept appearing that Thomas didn't recognize. He copied it into a search bar. A second later, Blue Ivy Spa and Suites, room reservations. He leaned back in his chair. Classy. Next, he dug into old emails, those she thought he'd never read. She'd been sloppy. A receipt from a conference in Seattle, which aligned perfectly with Derek's business trip. A shared Uber ride from a downtown hotel to a private residence, one they had no reason to visit together. Madeline had booked the trip on her old email and forwarded confirmation to her newer one. Careless, so confident in his ignorance. Thomas wasn't just angry anymore. He was awakening. By the end of the week, he was sitting across from a private investigator in a quiet corner booth of a diner far from town. Her name is Madeline. This is her number, work address, schedule. And this guy, Derek, my former best friend. The PI, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no need for small talk, nodded as she flipped through the photos he handed her. What are you looking for? Affair proof. No, I already know they're sleeping together. Then what? I want everything. How long? Where? Who paid for what? Any financial links, side accounts, shell businesses. And he paused, staring down at his black coffee. Any leverage, legal or otherwise. She gave a short, impressed whistle. You're not screwing around. No, Thomas said flatly. I'm not. She slid a contract toward him. Give me 10 days. He signed without blinking. While the PI went to work, Thomas dove into his own research. He started digging through old investments, particularly the ones he made into Derek's software company a decade ago, back when they were still buddies who drank beer on game nights and talked about early retirement. He'd written a quiet check, taken a 20% silent partner stake, and let Derek run the show. He hadn't thought about it in years, but when he accessed the digital ledger, things didn't add up. The company was bleeding. Revenue projections were being fudged. There were multiple delayed tax filings. A quick call to a business analyst friend confirmed it. Derek's firm was 3 bad quarters away from collapse. Thomas's lip curled. Madeline had bet her future on a sinking ship. But she didn't know that yet. And she certainly didn't know that the man she'd publicly humiliated still held a sizable equity stake that could make or break Derek's business, or even bury it. That night, Thomas met with a man in a towering office overlooking the city skyline. Richard Faulkner was a senior partner at a prestigious firm, and more importantly, a longtime client of Thomas's former consulting business. Madeline doesn't know I'm here, Thomas began, handing him a folder. I haven't signed anything yet, but I want to explore options. Richard raised an eyebrow as he read through the packet. She served you divorce papers in public? At a restaurant? With a guy sitting next to her? Yep. Jesus. That's stone cold. You haven't heard the half of it. Thomas outlined everything he'd uncovered. The affair timeline, the financial deceit, the business ties, Madeline's recent transfer of joint assets into a private account, something he was already preparing to contest with bank statements and transfer logs. When he finished, Richard leaned back, whistling low. She's going to wish she'd hired a lawyer first. I want it quiet, Thomas said. No threats, no tantrums. I want her to feel nothing until the walls fall in. You're planning a strategic hit. Thomas nodded once. I can work with that, Richard said, already reaching for a legal pad. We'll hit her with forensic accounting, asset tracing, spousal misconduct, and fiduciary breach. Since she moved marital funds secretly, we can file an injunction. We'll lock up anything with your name on it. Thomas's jaw flexed. I want Derek buried too. Well, Richard smirked. If he's been using business funds to wine and dine your wife, we might have grounds for civil theft. That's assuming we can trace the transactions. Did your PI mention when she'd deliver? Next week. Perfect. Let's keep this under wraps. Paper trail first. Fireworks later. Back home, Thomas returned to routine like a seasoned actor. He cooked breakfast, smiled through Mia's story about a group project, helped James fix a leaky bike tire. When Madeline texted about setting up a meeting with the mediator, he replied with a calm, "Soon. I'm consulting attorneys this week." She didn't respond, but Thomas could imagine her smug satisfaction, thinking she still had control. Each day that passed, he moved like a ghost in the house, unseen, unnoticed, collecting ammunition. He even started a spreadsheet. Names, dates, transfers, photos, text logs. Every lie she ever told was documented, categorized, and cross-referenced. By the time he sat back to look at the full picture, Thomas no longer recognized the man who had once built his life around Madeline's smile. He wasn't broken anymore. He was focused, measured, sharp-edged. She had burned the old version of him to the ground. And now he walked through the ashes, gathering every ember she left behind. Thomas sat in his quiet living room, coffee in hand, bathed in the soft glow of the television, though it played only as background noise. His laptop was open on the coffee table, showing an all-too-familiar social media post. There she was, Madeline, posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, wrapped in a red designer coat and holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "To new beginnings with my soulmate. Bonjour from Paris. Hashtag love of my life. Hashtag no regrets. Hashtag fresh start." Next to her, Derek grinned like a lottery winner, arm around her waist. Another post followed moments later. A boomerang of their clinking champagne flutes atop a candlelit dinner with a view of the Seine. Thomas exhaled slowly through his nose. "Hope you're enjoying your last taste of luxury," he murmured. He clicked away from the page and opened a secure messaging portal. "Status update?" He sent it to Faulkner. The reply came within seconds. "Asset freeze went through this morning. Filed in 2 states and served to all financial institutions tied to Madeline Saunders. She'll find out soon enough. We've also secured the debt purchase agreement for Derek's firm. Congratulations. You're officially his landlord." Thomas leaned back in his chair, a slow smirk curling across his lips. "Let them drink their wine," he said to no one in particular. "They'll be choking on it soon." At a high-end cafe in Paris's 7th arrondissement, Madeline stirred her espresso with idle grace, not yet realizing the tremor about to quake through her fantasy honeymoon. Derek sat across from her, tapping away at his phone. "We should do Venice next. Or maybe Capri." Madeline gave a slow, lazy smile. "As long as we don't have to come home to that miserable town anytime soon. God, I feel free." Derek chuckled. "You're glowing. Seriously, I should be," she said, tossing her hair back. "I ditched 23 years of dead weight." She was mid-laugh when her phone vibrated on the table. She glanced down, expecting another flood of likes or comments. Instead, her brow creased. "That's weird." "What?" "My card just declined on the room upgrade." "Huh, I used my own. You know, my savings account." It said, "Transaction denied." "Hold on." She pulled up her banking app, frowning deeper. "What the hell?" Derek looked up now. "Something wrong?" She clicked furiously. "Everything's frozen? What the hell does court order hold mean?" "I transferred over 100,000 into that account." Panic was rising in her voice. Derek frowned and leaned forward. "Maybe it's just a mistake. Call the bank." She did, loudly. "I need to speak with someone now." "No, I don't want to hold. My funds are frozen." "This is urgent." "Yes? I'll wait for a supervisor." Derek looked increasingly uneasy. Madeline paced the marble floor of the cafe lobby as the call dragged on. Her voice started low but escalated rapidly. "What do you mean legal injunction? I didn't know. I wasn't served anything. This has to be a mistake. I'm out of the country, my lawyer." I don't have one yet. I thought." She went quiet, then turned slowly to Derek, eyes wide. "It's Thomas," she whispered. "He did this." Back home, Thomas walked into his lawyer's office like he'd been there 1,000 times. Richard Faulkner greeted him with a chuckle. "Well, I hope they enjoyed their room service." Thomas eased into the leather chair. "Judging by the call logs we intercepted, she's in meltdown mode." They never saw it coming. Madeline didn't even retain counsel before flying off to Paris. That little money transfer of hers? Slam dunk breach of fiduciary duty. We'll crush her on that alone. Thomas's tone was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "And Derek?" Faulkner grinned. "His company's debts are now legally held by 3 entities, each linked back to your trust network. And since the firm defaulted on its last payment cycle, foreclosure clauses are kicking in. You'll own his office space within 30 days. Thomas laughed once, a low, mirthless sound. "The bastard's living in a fantasy right now." probably drinking Dom Perignon, thinking he just upgraded his life. Faulkner leaned forward. He has no idea his future's built on quicksand. You want to start the next phase now? No. Let them squirm. Let them call, beg, blame each other for what's happening. The longer they think they're safe, the harder it hits when the floor vanishes. Meanwhile, back in Paris, things were unraveling quickly. Madeleine stared blankly at her phone, which buzzed again with another declined alert. Her credit card was now suspended due to suspected legal conflict. She looked across the table at Derek, whose own phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree. "Why is my CFO emailing me this late?" he muttered, then tapped through the notifications. His face paled. "What?" Madeleine asked, voice sharp. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood and walked outside, pacing as he read. Madeleine followed. "Derek, what is it?" He turned to her, jaw clenched. "Someone just bought our debt. All of it. 3 shadow companies. They triggered a technical default. We're going to lose the main office." Madeleine's mouth opened. "But how? Who?" "I don't know," he snapped. "Somebody came out of the shadows and ripped the carpet out from under us. We're hemorrhaging already, and now we owe 6 figures due in less than 2 months." Madeleine blinked at him. "So you're saying you're broke?" He barked a bitter laugh. "Not yet, but we're about to be sued, probably evicted, and I can't even access emergency credit. It's like someone's choking us from the inside." Madeleine went quiet. The wheels were turning. Her mouth was dry. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's Thomas." Derek stared at her. "What do you mean?" "He's not reacting. He's engineering. He's not heartbroken, he's planning." Back in the States, Thomas sat on his patio that night, sipping bourbon as the sun set. The garden lights flickered on, casting a soft glow across the trimmed hedges Madeleine had once insisted on planting. He pulled out his phone and reloaded her page. Nothing new. He imagined her silence wasn't for lack of trying, but because she no longer had anything worth posting. He took another slow sip, staring out over the backyard. There was no fury in him now, only control. "Funny," he said aloud, tilting the glass, "how fast castles crumble when they're built on someone else's back." The wheels of the airplane screeched against the runway as Madeleine's first-class return flight touched down. Gone was the carefree glamour of her Parisian escape. Her designer sunglasses did little to mask the storm tightening across her face. She hadn't slept on the flight. Her nails were chewed raw. Her once pristine travel bag hung awkwardly off her shoulder, disheveled. She hadn't spoken to Derek since the blow-up at the hotel. He'd accused her, loudly, of ruining everything, of lying, of dragging him into a mess she promised was clean and easy. She'd stormed out, clutching what little cash she had left, promising to fix it once she got back to the States. Now, her Uber pulled up outside the family home. Her home, or so she thought. As she stepped out, dragging her suitcase behind her, she froze. The lawn was trimmed. The porch lights were on. It looked just like she left it, but wrong somehow. Off. There was no warmth. No sense of welcome. She took a breath and walked up the familiar steps. She tried her key. It didn't turn. Frowning, she tried again, harder this time. The deadbolt refused to budge. "What the hell?" she muttered. She rang the bell. No answer. She knocked. Still nothing. A neighbor walking their dog passed by and gave her a tight, sympathetic nod. Madeleine stepped back and opened her phone, dialing the bank. She needed to move some money. Maybe pay a locksmith. Something. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the voice on the line said politely. "That account is still under court hold. You'll need to contact your attorney." She bit back a scream. "It's my account. I transferred the money before, I understand. But it was a joint marital account prior to transfer, and there's an injunction filed. There's nothing I can do." She hung up and called her lawyer, except she didn't have one. She'd never bothered. Why would she? She had the upper hand. Thomas was always too soft, too slow, but clearly not anymore. Her phone vibrated again. A message. Notice of property transfer. 842 Maple Ridge Lane. Ownership. Thomas Saunders. Title finalized. Her knees buckled slightly. She wasn't locked out. She was legally out. Downtown, Derek was mid-scream at his financial advisor. "What do you mean the accounts are flagged? You told me we were clear." The advisor held up both hands. "Derek, listen. The lawsuits are naming you personally. You signed off on the 2019 filings. Those documents are being subpoenaed. And if Thomas's team proves misuse of investor funds, that's not just a civil case. That's criminal. Derek's face was bright red. Madeline told me this was all handled. She said Thomas didn't have the balls to fight back. Well, the advisor said grimly, seems she misjudged. Later that day, Derek met Madeline at a cafe near her former yoga studio. The moment she walked in, it was clear she'd been crying. Her mascara was streaked, her clothes rumpled. She looked nothing like the woman who'd posed in red silk on the Eiffel Tower a week earlier. He didn't even let her sit before he exploded. You said this was clean. You said he'd roll over and take it. Madeline's voice cracked. He's not who I thought. He's not the same anymore. No shit. Derek spat. You dragged me into this war and didn't even know the enemy. Other patrons began to stare. One woman whispered something to her friend. Madeline's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Keep your voice down, she hissed. Derek leaned in, his voice sharp as broken glass. He owns my debt. He froze your accounts. He locked you out of your house. And now I'm being subpoenaed for tax fraud because of money I spent on you. Madeline's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice fell to a whisper. We can fix this. Maybe if I talk to him. If I just... Derek stood. You talk to him. You fix this. Or we're both going down. He threw a few bills on the table and walked out, leaving her sitting there, alone, shaking, with tears welling in her eyes. The same cafe where she used to brunch with friends, where she once gloated over leaving Thomas behind. Now she couldn't even finish her coffee. That evening, Madeline stood outside Thomas's home again, her former home, wearing the same coat she wore in Paris, now wrinkled and dirty at the hem. Her hair was pulled back, uneven and rushed, and her mascara had run from the fresh tears she hadn't had time to wipe away. She knocked once, then again, and again. Finally, after the longest minute of her life, the door creaked open. Thomas stood in the doorway, calm, clean, freshly shaven in a navy blue sweater and jeans. Behind him, the house glowed softly, warm lighting, a faint trace of dinner still in the air. A jazz record played gently in the background. He looked like a man at peace. Madeline, on the other hand, looked like ruin in human form. She didn't speak at first, just stared, as though hoping he'd forget what had happened, that he'd soften like before. He didn't. Her lip trembled. Please. Thomas, her voice cracked. Can we talk? He tilted his head slightly. Not cruel, not smug, just indifferent. You gave me the kids, he said evenly. Now you can keep the consequences. Before she could say another word, the door clicked shut. She was left alone on the porch, the echo of her own undoing louder than anything she could say. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Madeline sat on the edge of the futon, her only piece of furniture besides a borrowed coffee table, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The walls of the studio were bare, gray, suffocating. A far cry from the warm beige and soft lighting of the home she once ruled. The crown jewel of their suburban neighborhood. Her home. Her eyes were red, puffy. Her makeup smudged from yet another failed attempt to make herself presentable. Please, just call back, she whispered into the phone as her trembling thumb hovered over Thomas's contact. Just, please, she hung up without pressing send. The voicemail box was already full from the last 3 messages she left that week. Across from her, Derek's suitcases stood by the door. Madeline looked up as he emerged from the bathroom, towel around his neck, hair wet, jaw clenched. He didn't look at her as he moved across the room to zip up his duffel bag. Where are you going? She asked, voice weak, almost childish. He didn't answer right away, just kept packing. Derek, he finally turned, locking eyes with her. Eyes that once sparkled with charm and mischief, now cold and distant. You know, when we started this, I thought it was an upgrade. That's what you promised me. I didn't promise. You said he was weak. You said we'd be living large off his stupidity. You said he wouldn't fight back. Madeline's voice cracked. I didn't know he would change like that. I thought you thought wrong. Derek snapped, slamming his duffel shut. And now I've got 2 pending lawsuits. My company is toast, my credit's wrecked, and guess what? My friends won't even answer my calls anymore. One of them called me a home-wrecking leech. He laughed bitterly. That one stung. Madeline stood slowly, crossing her arms over her chest. Are you just going to leave? After everything? Derek looked around the tiny apartment, disgust written across his face. There's nothing here worth staying for. Her face twisted in pain. We were supposed to build a life. No, you burned one down, and I helped pour the gasoline. That's all we did. She reached for his arm. He pulled back. Don't, he said. This whole thing? It was a fantasy, and it cost me everything. You weren't worth it. He walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Madeline sank to the floor, staring at the closed door. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as the tears started again. 2 days later, Madeline sat across from her boss in the office she'd once walked through with confidence and pride. Her hands gripped the folded tissues in her lap, knees bouncing anxiously. Her boss, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for clean public image, didn't waste time. Madeline, the board met this morning. We've seen the headlines, the lawsuit filings, the articles floating around. Your name is in everything. Madeline tried to speak, but her boss held up a hand. We're a public-facing firm. We can't afford this kind of attention. I know you've been with us a long time, but your conduct, personally and financially, is damaging to our brand. I didn't do anything illegal, Madeline whispered. Her boss tilted her head. Maybe not. But scandal isn't always about legality, Madeline. It's about perception. And yours is toxic right now. Madeline swallowed, her voice nearly inaudible. Please don't fire me. I have nothing left. There was a long pause. I'm sorry. Madeline walked out of the building numb, carrying a small box with her last desk belongings. No one said goodbye. No one made eye contact. That night, Madeline sat on the floor of her apartment, the room lit only by the flickering light from her TV, which was stuck on the no-signal screen. She stared blankly ahead, knees pulled to her chest. Her phone was in her hand again. She scrolled through old photos, Thomas holding their daughter in the hospital. Thomas smiling beside her at a beach resort. Thomas asleep on the couch with their son curled against him. God, what have I done? She pressed the call button one last time. Straight to voicemail. The following evening, rain poured steadily over the neighborhood. Madeline stood on the familiar porch, the one that used to be hers. Her coat clung to her, soaked and heavy. Her hair stuck to her face. She could barely feel her fingers. She knocked. Then again. The porch light flicked on, and then the door opened. Thomas stood there, casual in a flannel and jeans, holding a mug of tea. The warm glow from the living room behind him painted a picture of quiet peace. Stability. Family. Everything she didn't have. He looked at her, unblinking. Calm, as if the rain didn't touch him. Madeline's voice broke instantly. Thomas, he didn't speak. Just waited. Her bottom lip trembled. I messed up. I made the worst mistake of my life. She sniffled, wiping her face uselessly. I thought Derek would make me happy. I thought I needed something else. Something more. But it was all fake. All of it. He's gone. I lost my job. I lost everything. And I miss God. I miss you. She stepped forward, hand half raised like she might touch his chest. I need you. I need my family back. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, Thomas. Please just say something. Thomas looked at her for a long time. So long she thought maybe he would forgive her. Maybe the pain she saw in his eyes months ago still meant he cared. Then, gently, calmly, he spoke. You're not my wife anymore. The words cut deeper than any scream ever could. You're a lesson. Madeline's face crumpled as he stepped back and closed the door. Click. Her sobs echoed against the house, muffled only by the sound of the rain beating down on the roof above. The world had slowed down for Thomas in a way that felt both foreign and liberating. The days that stretched before him now weren't consumed with the gnawing pain of betrayal or the frantic noise of legal battles. Time felt quieter, more forgiving, and with each passing day, he began to shed the weight that had once clung to him. He had learned to breathe again. The house, which once felt hollow and cold in the aftermath of Madeline's betrayal, now echoed with life, his children's laughter filling the air, their easy chatter over dinner, the playful noise of game nights. Thomas had become the father they deserved. The father who was present, who took them to soccer practice, helped with math homework, and played ridiculous games in the living room to make them laugh. The house felt like home again. Every room carried the weight of shared memories. But now they were memories filled with warmth and love, not just the ghosts of what had been. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Thomas sat on the couch, his feet propped up, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He flicked through the channels lazily, but his thoughts were far away. His life had unfolded in a way he never could have predicted. And yet, as time passed, he found a quiet gratitude in the life he was building. It wasn't until he heard a familiar knock at the door that he realized his thoughts had wandered further than he thought. Thomas set his glass down, stretching before making his way to the door. "Eloise," he said with a smile as he opened it. She stood there in a pair of jeans, a simple sweater, and her usual warm, unassuming smile that had always put him at ease. Eloise had always been a friend, someone who'd watched from the sidelines, quietly cheering him on from a distance. She'd never pushed, never forced anything. And through all the chaos, she had stayed a steady presence in his life, offering support when he needed it most. "Hey," Eloise greeted, her voice soft, but carrying an unmistakable warmth. "I brought you something." "Something? You always bring something," Thomas teased, stepping back to let her in. He gestured to the couch. "Have a seat. What's a surprise this time?" Eloise smiled, a soft, knowing smile. She handed him a small, wrapped package. Thomas raised an eyebrow, sitting down next to her. "You're really going to make me unwrap it?" he asked, his smile never faltering. "You're a grown man, Thomas. You're perfectly capable of opening your own gifts," she teased back. Thomas grinned and pulled at the wrapping, revealing an old book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He looked at her, surprised. "You got me a philosophy book? Thought it might help," Eloise said, her eyes glinting with mischief. "It helped me through a rough patch, so I thought it might resonate with you." Thomas was touched. Not only had she thought of him, but she had understood. She'd always known the depth of his thinking, the introspective nature that often kept him on the outside looking in. But what Eloise had never seen, what no one had seen, was the damage he'd carried inside for years. "I'll get a read." "Thanks," he said sincerely, glancing up at her. The softness in her gaze made his heart feel lighter, almost as though she understood the weight of everything he'd been through without having to ask. And then, as if the moment were inevitable, Eloise spoke again, her voice lower, quieter. "How have you been?" "Really?" Thomas exhaled, leaning back into the couch, his hands resting on the armrests. His gaze drifted to the window, where the last rays of the sun were fading behind the hills. His mind wasn't as turbulent as it once was, but there were still scars there, deep ones that he could only acknowledge in moments like this. "I'm getting there," he said slowly, his voice calm. "It's not easy, Eloise. The kids, they're good. They're really good. But it's still hard to shake off the past." "I know," Eloise said softly, her hand coming to rest lightly on his. "But you're stronger than you know, Thomas. You've been through something so painful, and yet here you are. You're here, and you're still moving forward." His lips quirked up into a small, rueful smile. "I wasn't sure I'd be able to. After everything, you were never supposed to go through it alone," she murmured. "And you don't have to." Her words sank in, heavier than he expected. He'd never really seen Eloise in the light of someone who could be more than a friend. They'd shared their struggles, their dreams, their plans, but always from the safe space of friendship. He had never once considered that there might be something more there. But now now, in the quiet stillness of the moment, he wondered if maybe he'd been too blind to see. But he couldn't rush it. "Not now. I don't want to rush things," he said finally, his voice steady. "I don't think I could rush anything right now. There's so much to figure out still." "I get it," Eloise replied gently. "We don't have to rush. There's no pressure, just one step at a time." And for the first time in a long while, Thomas felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. It was a peace that wasn't based on forgetting, on pretending the pain wasn't there, but on acceptance. He was moving forward, slowly, cautiously, but steadily, and maybe, just maybe, there was a future worth embracing. A few weeks later, Thomas and Eloise stood at the edge of a quiet lake, the cool autumn air brushing against their faces. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the water surface. Thomas glanced at Eloise beside him, her eyes on the horizon, her expression one of quiet contemplation. "You know," he said, his voice low but steady, "I used to think everything had a purpose, even the bad things. But it wasn't until I went through all of that, until I really hit rock bottom, that I understood what purpose really meant." Eloise turned to him, her eyes soft. "What do you mean?" He smiled, though it was bittersweet. "I thought I needed the approval of the people I loved to feel whole. But in the end, it wasn't about that. It was about finding my own purpose. And once I did, once I learned to stand on my own, that's when the peace came." They continued walking along the edge of the lake, hand in hand now, the silence between them comfortable. His thoughts drifted back to his voice earlier, to what he had come to realize. "She gave me pain. It gave me purpose. And purpose gave me peace." He'd found that peace not in the absence of pain, but in the acceptance of it, and in learning that he was stronger than he'd ever believed. And with Eloise at his side, slowly, steadily, without rushing, they would face the future together.